all set? Okay. All right, good evening. It's Thursday, May the 4th, special meeting time because of the village election on May 2nd. This is the Village of New Paltz Planning Board meeting. And on our agenda this evening, we have one public hearing for PB 1709, 32 Prospect Street. Then we have a new application, PB 1710, for 3438 Main Street, for the painting of a mural. Ongoing applications, PB 1709, we'll come back to that one, and then a continuation of PB 1602, Zero Place. Several administrative business items. Our planner, David Gilmore, is going to brief us on the Ulster County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. I'd like to see if we can firm up a time for a site visit for 12 Main Street for the Black Box Theater. Also talk a little bit about some in-house training ideas, and we have to close a trust and agency account, and then we're done for the evening. Approval of minutes and meeting overview, of course. Okay, so any amendments, changes? All right, is there anybody here who wants to speak at public comment? All right, hearing none. I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing for PB 1709.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All,
You and me, buddy.
What's that?
You and me, we can alternate.
Oh, okay.
yeah, so Dennis will be sitting in tonight for Rich Steffens. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody here to speak on the 32 Prospect Street?
Yeah.
Well, you're here representing the applicant, so I don't think you're speaking in a public hearing. David, if you'd like to come up to the microphone.
Well, I'd like to know what it's all about.
Okay, I'll try to give you a summary after we close the public hearing. Is that your only comment?
Well, no, I mean, I don't even know where 32 Prospect is. Is it right behind my house? Or is
I'm not in, I don't know the answer to. It's,
and then I would like to know what, it just says site plan for existing addition. But what does that mean?
okay.
I mean, I have a lot of questions about this, but I don't know what's
Right.
going on, so.
Okay. I will try to answer your questions. We met with the applicant at the meeting before this one, and there are no actual physical changes happening to the building. It's basically bringing an existing situation into compliance with a site plan in order to allow them to get a certificate of occupancy before they can go ahead and close on the sale of the house.
But you can't tell me which house is 32 Prospect.
I can't tell you where it is in relation to your house because I don't know precisely where the back of your house is.
Do you know what number Dungan's house is?
It's on the other side of the street from 32. I don't know precisely. You might know. Where's 32 Prospect in relation to David's house on Grove, which is at the end of Grove?
Pretty close. Pretty close.
I'm not sure how this, it's close enough that you received a notice apparently.
Yeah, I got the notice, but I expected to see plans and,
Well, then you would have needed to come into the building department during regular hours and look at them. That's the,
You can also give me a call. If I haven't posted them online, I can just put them right online at the Village of New Paltz website.
well, doesn't say that here.
okay, so,
So it's, all it is just to bring whatever's there up to code.
essentially, yes, and unless you have any specific objections you'd like to raise right now, I can't I will bring you up to date once we get to the application, but I can't really have a conversation with
Can
you.
I make a comment then?
This is awkward.
No,
I mean,
it's not unusual for, usually the larger projects, but it's not unusual at the beginning of the public hearing for the applicant to go ahead and describe what the application is.
Okay, why don't we do that?
Public hearing can go ahead and
Okay,
listen to that and then respond.
okay, why don't we do that? Sierra, if you wanna come up and, thanks, Rick. If you would just summarize what it is that we're doing, while you all are in front of the planning board.
In 1970, someone, 72, someone who owned the house submitted plans to build an addition of 12 feet by 12 feet with an 8-foot by 12-foot porch. Turns out that they built the addition 12 by 20 feet and extended the porch
Make sure he's a-
by 8 feet.
Did you hear that, Nick?
Are you hearing what he said?
The house behind me, okay, what do you wanna do?
That's what he
he's
just
talking
said, so if you don't mind repeating it.
about. Okay, you wanna come up closer just so we can make sure that you hear?
I should be wearing my hearing aids.
Should have done the research ahead of time.
Yes, that's the house behind me.
Okay,
Okay, so in 1972, the owner of the house submitted plans and obtained a building permit to build the addition, which is behind the house. They built it a different size from what they submitted, and they never closed out the permit, so they never got a certificate of occupancy. The current owners purchased the house in 2000, and this was not an issue at the time. Since then, the building department might have discovered some old records that they couldn't find before, and they discovered that that addition does not have a certificate of occupancy. So in order to get a certificate of occupancy, and because it was built different size from what they submitted, it got referred to the planning board for approval for that size addition. So there won't be any physical change to what you can see from your backyard. Nothing's going to change. It's going to be exactly the same. We're just here for a procedural process to get approval for the addition.
So you're talking about the porch, the screened-in porch?
That's correct.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's what,
Now, do you live there?
No,
You rent it out to students?
no.
excuse me, before you start grilling him, he is the architect representing
Oh, he's the
the
architect.
homeowner who doesn't live in the area. It's up for sale, they have a buyer, they're in the process of trying to settle all of these outstanding issues so that they can finish the sale of the building. What's gonna happen to the building subsequent to that is not something that we're discussing here, except to say that we know that there are certain, which we'll get to after the public hearing, there are certain code compliance issues that need to be addressed. In addition to what we're looking at, which is a procedural issue, in order to identify, what the building inspector wants us to do is to identify what is the current, on the site plan, what is the actual current structure that's on the house, and since it wasn't built to the specs that it was originally provided, we need to make this adjustment,
Okay.
so.
So in other words, it's just gonna be to bring it up to code.
Yes, it will look exactly the same. Yep. There won't be, there's no plans to, within this sphere at the moment, there are no plans to make any changes to the house. If the new owners decide they want to make changes, they will need to come to the building department and perhaps come to us, depending on how extensive those changes are. So,
All right, and I haven't got anything to say then.
okay, thanks.
Thanks for
Thank you,
coming.
Ciro.
What's your name? I'm sorry.
David Cacamo,
Okay, thank you.
CACCAMO,
Yeah, that'd be
27
great.
Grove
Thanks.
Street.
Thanks, David. Anybody else here this evening to speak during the public hearing on 32 Prospect Street? Hearing none, motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. So Sierra, we'll be back to that one shortly. Ryan, if you'd like to come up, we'll do PB 1710. Okay, if you want to just briefly summarize what's going on, what you've got planned. and what
I
it's
have
for.
plans, proposed the, like roughly 15 by 15 foot mural on the side of 3436 Main Street, which is Shotzi's in Snug Harbor on the west side of the building, facing the Wallkill River. I have permission from the property owner. The mural is part of a live fundraising benefit to benefit Go.Go, which is a women's healthcare initiative, and TMI Project, which is a memoir reading project. And it's going to be beautiful, and you're going to love it if you allow it. It's going to be big. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so it turns out that our code, as per section 21225E, requires that murals be reviewed and approved by planning board. And this was brought to their attention, to Ryan and to Melanie Cronin's attention recently. So the situation is that you're proposing to do this on the 17th of this month.
Yep.
And we do have to hold a public hearing, which we would hold on the day before or the night before on the 16th. So what I would like to do is ask the planning board to consider waiving most of the site plan review requirements and accept the application as it's been submitted. I'd also like to ask that we waive any need for an escrow for this one.
Is it a motion?
Yeah, I'm making a motion. And, well, let's do that one first. So those two items.
So moved.
A second on that?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Furthermore, I'd like to make a motion to consider recommending that the village board refund the $300 application fee, as this is a charity event.
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. The building inspector, I'll note, is in agreement with all of these requests. In addition, this is a type 2 action under seeker, and it doesn't require submission to the Ulster County Planning Board for review, so I'd like to make a motion to set a public hearing for 7 p.m. on Tuesday, May 16th, 2017.
So moved.
Any discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
That's it.
Okay.
So
Thank
we'll
you.
have the public hearing, and we'll,
I have a question. Is this a drawing of the mural or just?
That's what the property owner kind of was leaning towards, that image, which I've used before on a Tuttletown silo.
Sure.
I did, so he saw that, and that's what he was lending itself to. I don't think it's going to be as big as that. The proportions, it'll probably stay under the window, you know. But
Really
that's
gives
it.
us an idea.
Yeah.
that was created by their graphic designer, who
Yeah.
took that image of Ryan's
Sure.
and put it on, so that's why it looks like what it does.
Yeah.
What is it, bird?
Yeah, yes, yeah, I'm sticking with that. It's just a matter of figuring out if they want a full 7-color version of it or 3-color. So,
Thanks.
yeah.
All right, so
Good. See you Tuesday,
the 16th.
16th?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Tuesdays from now. Thanks.
All right, have a great night.
Okay, so let's go back to 32 Prospect Street.
We just went outside.
Ciro, do you want to rejoin us? Well, until he does, it's fine. We can move on. What I'd like to let me pull up the resolution for this. Waiting for him. Okay, so as I noted to all of you in some correspondence that yes, you're back up.
At the last meeting, they wanted me to check the height of the garage versus the distance.
Yes, you want to
And they
tell
were
us?
both 13 feet, give or take a couple inches.
Okay, so it's
So it's
Close to being in
whoever built
compliance.
the garage must have known about the
that it-
distance separation.
Okay, So in that respect,
And they
it's
also
fine.
wanted a letter from the building inspector, which I think he sent to you already?
He
The building
did. He
inspector?
sent us his letter of opinion about,
It being an existing,
right, pre-existing non-conforming
Right.
condition for the structures,
Right.
in terms of any setbacks or issues around that. So we're fine with that. In addition, though, we noted, received a letter last week from a neighbor on Prospect Street who raised some additional compliance issues, which you were made aware of through some emails. And the building inspector, Brian Arms, and I discussed what our respective roles are in resolving these, and what I made clear was that I felt that the letter was raising issues that were largely the responsibility of the building department, which is an enforcement arm. Ours is limited to trying to bring the plans and so forth into compliance with what's actually there. The one thing that I am identifying within the resolution that was one of the issues raised was the number of bedrooms that's allowed in the house. There was some question about whether there were 5 or 6 or 7. The advertisement, at least one indicated 7. And we wanted to ensure that there were, in fact, going to be only 5 bedrooms. It's identified as a 2-family residence with a 2-bedroom unit on the ground floor and a 3-bedroom unit above. So the resolution does reflect that. Any other issues that the building inspector has raised, such as apparently a sump pump that was connected into the sewer line, is outside of our purview. However, all of the compliance issues, should we approve this tonight, will have to be resolved between the property owner
the
and
applicant and the building inspector?
between the property owner and the building inspector before he chooses to do whatever he's gonna do, such as offer a certificate of compliance. But
Alright.
we'll take care of our part tonight.
Okay.
Fair?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so, unless there's any other questions from board members about this application, we'll take care of the resolution.
Yep.
All right, okay, so we have a resolution for site plan amendment approval for 32 Prospect Street. This is planning board application PB 1709, and it's resolution number PB 1709. So, April 4th, 2017, the applicants applied for site plan amendment approval for an existing addition that was constructed under a building permit issued in 1972, but for which a certificate of occupancy was never issued. The remaining parts of this whereas we've discussed this evening, and now therefore it is hereby resolved by the Village of New Paltz Planning Board that the application of Ben and Ada Wood for site plan approval amendment at 32 Prospect Street as shown on the above referenced application materials is hereby approved, subject to the following conditions: payment of all fees in escrow, and submission of a final site plan with a signature block suitable for signature by an authorized representative of the planning board. Furthermore, it is noted that this resolution approves nothing beyond that authorized by the zoning code. All code violations on this property identified by the building inspector and otherwise must be remedied to the satisfaction of the building inspector. So, motion to approve that.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second.
any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we're done.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and sign the amended version tomorrow, and then you guys can work with the building inspector to finish this up.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, it's a pleasure. Take care. Okay. So then we have a discussion of PB 1602, our continuing discussion about the expanded Part 3 of the EAF for Zero Place. Let me just note that we've chosen Alta Planning and Design to serve as transportation consultants for a review of the
I'm sorry, who?
Alta, A-L-T-A, Planning and Design, to serve as our transportation consultants for review of the expanded EAF Part 3. Alta is a New York-based firm that specializes in multimodal transportation and bicycle transportation in particular, although they're full service. They're currently working on the Empire State Trail Plan, which is actually involves some of this area. It will ultimately include the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail as part of this plan to connect New York City to the far north of New York and all the way out to Buffalo. So I think they're a good choice for this. We are expecting work from them, something from them within 30 days. I also decided to engage Bean Planning as consultants to look at the rest of the other 3 items that are part of the scope and that were, to which the applicant responded. The rationale for doing that, so in other words, they'll be looking at the visual and aesthetic impacts associated with consistency with community character and consistency with community plans. The rationale for considering Bean was that, for me anyway, was a couple of things. The conversations that we had at the planning board table over the last several meetings related to those items made me think that it might be useful to get some outside expertise and some input. And then the site visit, which is what we're going to get to tonight, which I thought was extremely useful, also made me think that it would be useful to have somebody who has some professional expertise and professional eye to look at some of this. So that's the situation with those, and Bean suspects that they should be able to have some to us in about 3 weeks. So, I know you had mentioned you might want to discuss this. That's sort of the background. Is there more to it that you want to address?
Yeah, I was very surprised to see, should I sit?
Yeah, please have a seat.
One second, Dave, before you begin, I just have a question about Milton.
Yes, absolutely.
You said they're working on the Empire State Plan to do it, in what capacity do you call?
David, do you know what they're? I don't know off the top of my head. I can find out.
Yeah.
I suspect that they're helping conceptually design the Empire State Trail that stretches across upstate, like from, I believe, Westchester Environments across the state and doing conceptual level planning and development of that project. That's what I suspect, and I believe they're working in conjunction with the New York State Hudson River Valley Greenway. But actually, the Greenway is a limited footprint, so I don't know the scope of their work. But that's what I suspect, and that anecdote comes from very limited discussions with Ulster County Transportation Council staff.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if they had it in their
Yeah.
in their bios, and I don't recall that they
It's
do.
pretty outdated.
Yeah, there might be some information on their website. I know.
Yeah, I'll take a look. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so the reality is you have sort of this sword of Damocles hanging over this, so I can't really say much in term other than, oh, okay, let's do it. But I was very surprised to see that for a number of reasons, and at least I'd like to articulate those.
Yeah, by all means.
I think I disagree in general with engaging another consultant on those 3 aspects. I didn't hear a lot of conversation at the table. I don't know what specifically you were alluding to when you said you heard a lot in the rationale for why you feel like you need more information there.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure I understand it in general terms, and I'm not sure that I understand the specific choice for a couple reasons. Let me start with the general, and then I'll get to the specific. The general, to me, it sounds like you're kind of re-adjudicating the code a little bit. Like, I thought that's what the MBR committee was for, not this administrative review of Zero Place. It feels a little bit like that to me. Also, you have a planner on staff, a village planner here. I don't know why you want another planner to engage this. I feel like you gave us a very extensive set of things to respond to, right? And we did that. We took 3 months of pause to give you a whole bunch of detail. And now, after considering this thing for a couple months, you're saying, let's stop and have somebody else look at it, right? In these particular areas where I didn't hear a whole lot of conversation about it. So we responded to those concerns, and I would hope that this body, this collection of 5 to 6 people could respond, could judge that for themselves. I think the other thing is you already know their perspective in terms of how they think about this. Well, now I'm getting into the specifics of the Behan choice, right? You have, from 2007, now granted that was 10 years ago, but you have Behan's perspective then. I think that by and large of their perspective is, has been expressed in the code and therefore is expressed in our building in terms of mixed use, et cetera, et cetera. The one area where our project and the code clearly disagrees with Behan, as we all know, is the height, where they put a maximum height, they recommended a maximum height of 40 feet, and Zero Place is 44 feet, 8 inches, right? I don't know what else you're going to learn from Behan that you don't already know. Secondly, I feel like there's a little bit of a conflict there. They're hired right now to help this MBR committee re-adjudicate the code. That's great. That's why we have this moratorium. Why are we also having them engage simultaneously this administrative review? Secondly, there's a little bit of a conflict because they've already rendered or offered their recommendations in 2007. So what new are they going to bring to this discussion? And are they going to commit to looking objectively at our application and the months and months of discussion that we've had and all the pictures we've submitted and the full body of stuff? And are they going to keep the blinders on and focus only on our response? I don't know. Third, when it comes to Behan specifically, I didn't know them at all other than reading their well-written recommendations in 2007. My first direct exposure to them was the other night at the NBR committee. And I was dismayed, frankly. I don't know how many of you attended that meeting, but the way they couched the density question was deeply unscientific in my mind. They really rigged it, in my view. They put pictures up there where they took one of the smallest lots in the entire NBR zone. They put the ugliest rendering of a building, this yellow and red bizarre thing that looked like it had, garage doors for windows on the bottom. And then they showed different sizes of this thing, and they asked the public to say, which one did you like? I liked the one-story version more than all the others because it was the least offensive one, because they were all so incredibly ugly. I don't know what that gauge is. So it gave me pause on their particular capabilities, and really it makes me worry when we're saying let's bring these guys in to get in the middle of this EAF discussion, to be frank. Now, maybe it's unfair to judge them on this one experience, but it's the only one I have, right? Let me stop there. I also have concerns about the financial cost of some of these things, but I just wanted to give you my sense of this and ask you why you feel like we need yet another voice in the room to make these judgments.
Okay. So my thinking about bringing them on and then discussing this with other members of the planning board and with other professionals, including our attorney and our planner, the idea is, as I said, stemmed in part for me from the discussion that the planning board had over the last several meetings about these issues around community character, community plans, and visual impacts. From my perspective, I felt that I would like planning board members to get an external, independent perspective about this, in addition to what we've received from our planner, because I felt that there was more to the conversation than I was hearing, and I was concerned about I felt that it would be valuable for them to get this additional information from an outside professional. The issue about this particular firm was the fact that they produced the original plan, and the fact that they're working now is, I'm certainly aware of that. I had discussions about whether there were conflicts, and the opinion that we got was that there aren't. I discussed it with Bean as well before considering them for this, and even when they, I mean, before this, when they were just being considered for the transportation portion. And I have no reason to think that as a professional firm that they are going to be incapable of looking at this specific project, which they have not yet looked at. So everything that you referred to were things that they looked at, looking at the zone in its entirety. Now they're being asked to look at a specific project and the details around that project as it's currently proposed in your revised version. And I have no reason to think, given my experience in working with them over the last 10 years or so on at least 3 different plans for the community of New Paltz Town and Village, that they are incapable of focusing on the task that they have in front of them separate from the other things that they have. I can't speak for them in terms of what you're conjecturing are biases that they might have, or presumptions that they might have.
But if they've recommended for the entire zone that you limit buildings to 40 feet, and then you give them a particular project
Yep.
that exceeds that, that's not supposed to, that doesn't seem like on the very face of it to be a bit of a conflict?
Can I
Yeah, please do.
They will have a scope of work. That scope of work is to look at this particular project in the context of the seeker review that's being done on the particulars review of project. For being is with respect to visual and community character. Whether or not they think that they're asked to look at what might be changed in the zone has really nothing to do with this, because the zone, you have nothing to do with what might happen. You're exempted from that, as you know. So this is as to the regulations that were adopted. If they had a different version of what ought to have been adopted, that's irrelevant at this point in time, and they're not to look at that. They have to look at the fact of what was adopted and your visual impacts that you have shown, and the board has expressed an interest in hearing from a professional as to whether or not, what that looks like is really an accurate representation of what it's going to look like, and visual impact analyses are there for that purpose.
And respecting the expression of the vision of the corridor as expressed in the code, they will respect it in the current.
They have to, because that's what the law is. The other is, I mean, what they thought would be better is not the law. What they're working on now, which may change it one way or the other, is not the law, not as it will be applied to your project. And we're gonna make sure that what they're looking at is the law that was adopted, the particulars of your project, the impacts that you have presented and responded, I think, in detail with respect to the request for the EAF analysis that you've done. But the board needs some professional advice as to whether or not everything seems like it appears. And it's a very usual thing for planning boards to get visual impact assistance on things.
I agree that professionals who have a long-standing record of service and that has been unquestioned, that has not been questioned by the vast majority, are probably really good at executing nuts and bolts. What worries me is, as we know, a lot of these things in those 3 areas that we're talking about are sort of wildly subjective, right? They're not about, this is one reason why I really draw a strong distinction between these 3 areas and the transportation one. Your appeal, what I heard of this board made a lot of sense to me. People turned to you, Mike, and said, man, I don't know how to consume this. It's highly technical. I need help. Makes sense. Turn to the professionals who can distill that stuff, synthesize it, give you a no-kidding sense of the impact. What scares me out of my mind is that you're having people kind of wade around in this really subjective area.
Well,
And
the visual impact is not really as subjective as you're advice that a planning board needs on a thing like visual impact is not subjective advice.
Okay, so,
That serves them no purpose whatsoever. What they need to know is that they have been presented with a
Accurate.
number of photos by you to say, this is what it's going to look like. There are many ways, and I'm not saying you did this at all, and I don't believe that you did this, but there are many ways, and I've seen it in other applications, in which things are distorted, sometimes
Sure.
purposely and sometimes very innocently. But when you get somebody who's schooled in visual impact analysis, they say, wait a second, if you take it from this view, it's naturally going to skew it one way or the other. Right?
okay.
And that's what this planning board has a right to rely upon, is that kind of advice.
Okay, that makes sense to me. That's not exactly what I heard, that it was about sort of assessing the technical aspects of those areas. But maybe that's what it is, and I totally get that, and that's cool. But I've never heard that raised as, oh my gosh, is this a real representation before? You
Well,
know, so
there
this,
was quite a number of comments. There were comments from the board saying, well, I think this looks like it's what it is, and taking it at your word. There's a lot of public comment suggesting that it might not look the way it looks, and I think,
but that's not what was discussed
No.
in the EAF responses. That never came up that I heard.
no, I'm just telling you that there are comments there, and it's a fair comment if there is some doubt with respect to what it is. And then there was a site visit, as I understand it, and we're gonna talk, I guess, some more about the site visit. But there were questions, that some of the board members, at least in my conversation with Michael, that there was some question raised as to whether or not what they thought it would look like from the pictures, whether that was gonna vary given their site visit and seeing locations on the ground. And those are the types of things that visual impact analysis can assist the board in saying. Sometimes the board would say, wait a second, this looks wildly out of proportion. Visual impact person can say, no, it's really, although it may look like that here, because of this thing, it's actually not out of proportion if you consider these other factors. And that's the kind of
I
advice
hear what
that-
you're saying. Is that the case, that you felt like at the site visit that there was something you wanted to assess, or is it is this a real articulation of their opinion, or is this
It's
a rationale you're providing? I'm trying to
He and I
understand
spoke, and it accurately represents my
your perspective.
perspective. Yep. That's true.
Okay. Like it, you know,
May I, just
Of course.
I have to say that his argument makes a great deal of sense.
Okay.
It is somewhat abstract and subjective in terms of the nature of character.
Okay.
Visual aspect, no, I can understand that. And if you have someone who is helping to guide a committee on writing the new laws, and they have a bias, I believe that they will bring that bias with them in the analysis, because why bite the hand that feeds you?
Okay.
And so with that, I would like to have them be restricted to some technical analysis and not on the opinion of character, because I believe that would be our responsibility to determine.
Okay.
And that we could do that through discussions with our planner.
Okay.
And I would like to see them restricted to that, because
Okay. I mean, alternatively, we could choose for that purpose, we could choose an altogether different firm.
that
That's fine.
would be, that would be my preference
Okay. I mean,
Preference of new firm.
of a new firm. If this firm is gonna do it, I think we need to restrict them to technical aspects of the visual analysis, and not to any more of the abstract, vague, and
okay.
subjective items.
I mean,
Just for sake of discussion, a study done 10 years ago, a decade ago, reflects only so much today.
Correct, but they're currently working with the committee that is writing the new laws for the same area in which.
But again, getting back to
Currently has it.
Michael's point, that that's not part of the context in which
I
you're working.
understand, but I think you bring your implicit bias with you if you're working with someone and getting money from them.
Well, that would be true of any money you're paying, so.
You're right. But if you get someone who is not involved in a second financial dealing with the same company or government, I think that they might come in with less of an implicit bias to the problem.
Were there other options that you explored yet, or?
No, but I don't see any. So when the proposals were sent out for review, when the requests for proposals were sent out to 4 firms, BN chose to respond by providing a 2-part proposal in which one part focused on transportation and the other part focused on non-transportation related issues. They were the only ones to do that because that wasn't really part of the scope of the request for proposals. But given what you all are discussing, I guess to expedite things, the first thing that I would consider doing would be to go back to Alta and just ask them what their availability is and expertise is in doing this additional work.
Yeah, I think that would be worth exploring, given what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's fine. We haven't made,
But you collectively feel that
I haven't signed anything, nothing, so we haven't reviewed anything, so we're, okay
this
with that.
narrower technical stuff that John's referring to, do you collectively feel that there's enough unknown in those, because this is fairly new to me. We have not been talking a lot about, oh gosh, do these pictures correctly represent the project? I haven't heard that maybe in a year. I don't know when the last time that was raised.
Okay, so.
Well, I think it had been raised, I think throughout
But
the
in the
process.
context of the EAF?
I think early in the process, when we were presenting exhibits, there were questions about how it was being presented. And that, I think, that train of thought carried through into the ways.
And there was something at the site review that spawned this thinking, or like what?
Certainly for me, yes. So when I went
What
to
was
so I went to the site and I took away 2 big things. One was that the layout of the public components of the site, the bike lanes, the sidewalks, the plazas, the green space, the landscaping, since I could walk on those areas and imagine what they look like, I was very pleased with all of that, all of those elements. When I walked the perimeter of the building, since you had laid out all of the edges and all of its insets, the takeaway message for me there was the same thing I felt when this proposal first came forward, which was for New Paltz, this is an extremely large building, and on par with. The only thing I can think that's on par with is things that we have on campus. So when I coupled that sense of the footprint of the building with something that's approaching 45 feet in height, and when you're on the rail trail, it's at least in parts over 50 feet from the ground because of the difference in height, I felt discomfited, and I felt that to get some perspective about this, I couldn't go any further myself in terms of really getting a sense of what this is, and I find myself thinking about alternatives in addition to the one that you've proposed, which is to shorten the length of the building. And so perhaps to give me some perspective from people who have worked in a lot of communities around the state with a lot of different kinds of buildings coming, I thought that they might be able to give me some sense of this that I couldn't really glean for myself. So that was part of my feeling about it. I put this out to planning board members, and but I think really this is, since we don't have conversations via email, this is their first chance to really respond to this. So, and, you know, what I'm hearing is valuable. And ultimately, you know, if a majority of the board members feel that going beyond anything specifically technical in terms of visual impact analysis, or, I mean, ultimately, it's a majority decision. I'm one person. I think there's value in getting, I personally do think there's value in getting some input. And I don't think that community character is as fuzzy and as amorphous as people throw this around. I think it is subjective to some extent, but I also think that it's possible to establish criteria for what it is that you really want to look at when you evaluate community character. And I think that I made it pretty clear last time that the presentation that you all gave was fair from your perspective, but not necessarily in agreement with my perspective about the issues around community character. We can agree to disagree about that, but ultimately, it's this board that has to make a decision about how we want to move forward with the environmental assessment. We have to, you know, at some point, and I hope relatively soon, come to a point where we're going to look at part 3, compile all of this information, and then vote on whether or not ultimately there are any potential significant impacts that require further review through an environmental impact statement, or whether we're ready to move on, or what. So I think for my purposes, I'm not trying to stall anything. I'm trying to, for me, I think this is valuable input. If a majority of the board disagrees, that's fine. You know, then that's the way we have to move with it. So, so let's continue this conversation. So,
Sure.
a different firm, but then what's the scope of that we would like to ask them to do, if anything, or if you all feel that we don't even need that, then by all means.
Well, I like the idea of splitting, having 2 firms working on these 2 assignments.
Okay.
I like that. Perhaps another firm that can work what we're considering BMT to work on, I think would be something to examine and explore and discuss. So, yes.
Okay. I mean, of the other firms that we've already communicated with, one of them I don't think is terribly appropriate. They're really traffic specialists.
Okay.
The other one is a large firm that we could discuss this with, although they've
Yeah. Right.
they have some other constraints. So we'll see.
This is a much trickier thing to examine than anything else, I think. So I think splitting up
Okay.
the assignment.
How do you all feel about that? I mean, I think from a time point of view, that's good too.
Yeah.
Because perhaps they'll get it done faster.
Yep.
Your thoughts?
What aspect of character will a consultant be able to help us with?
Well,
I'm sure
yeah, go ahead.
I was giving us some clear definition of what that means for one. No?
What- I mean,
What it means to a community, not just a single definition.
So I guess I'll tell you my perspective, and then maybe you can ask our planner and our attorney who've had a lot more experience in a variety of places. My sense is, before I think we can address community character, we have to decide what it is that we're talking about. That is, if we're looking at a project, then and so something new is going to happen within your community. What's the sphere of things that you want to look at, that you want to compare it to? So I'll give you an outside example that I was involved in recently in the town. So there's a project off the Thruway, at the corner of Putt Corners Road, 299 and the Thruway, for a commercial development on a currently undeveloped piece of land. When they got to the issue of community character, the people in the audience, including myself, who wanted them to look at that issue, talked about the impact of a project like that on issues around the community at large that involved, in some level, traffic impacts, which were being looked at separately, but still impacts on nearby neighborhoods, impacts on the sort of like how many commercial developments in that area do you want that are sort of chain store, not particularly thoughtful about the community kinds of things. What their engineer, the town planning board engineer, recommended they look at from community character is the local environment. They said, oh, well, there's lots of supermarkets and shopping centers already here, so what's one more? That's essentially, that was the limit of their, so it's two very different perspectives on community character for this project. And I think what we've heard is, we've heard from the public about what they believe the community character relationship should include. We've heard from the applicant, who I think has a very different perspective in the scope, in the document they provided to us. On the one hand, it was looking at the Huguenot Street and historic Huguenot Street, the National Landmark District, residential homes. In the other hand, it was looking at the corridor itself and not reflecting as much on the surrounding neighborhoods. And maybe we don't need a planner, but when this conversation came up with this board, I felt that people were, for me, uncomfortably silent about that issue. And therefore, I wasn't convinced that a majority of the board had given this the kind of hard look that I feel is necessary. And I don't mean disrespect to anybody on the board, but I didn't hear enough to know where everybody was starting from in order to then come to whatever conclusions you were coming to. And I thought perhaps somebody from the outside could give us a kind of a framework in which to consider all of this. And maybe that's not necessary. I mean, maybe this conversation alone will be enough. I don't know. If we can do it more efficiently and more cost effectively, that's fine, by all means. Does that help?
Only a slight bit. Not a, you danced around it.
Did I dance around it? No, okay, so, well then ask me the question again, because I'm sorry, maybe I went off on a tangent.
You did, but okay, I understand. So, I guess one of my questions, or one of the thoughts I have is, how do you define community character, and how do you apply that? And in defining community character, do we take into effect, as you said, only the local area there, which means in the example you gave, only the shopping centers that were around there, and in this case, would it only be the historic district that surrounds that? Would we take that as community character? Or, as you said, a greater sense, so then we look at the entire community character, and then you start to look at it and say, okay, so we have to include all the student rentals. And the little area that has some Victorian houses, and then the apartment complexes. And my perfect sense of it is that we really don't have a character, except that we're a college town. We have some isolated pockets where there are character, but our general character is we're a college town. And so I think to define it differently would be kind of fooling ourselves. Now, I think if we got that guy over there, right away, David, to help guide us through community character, I think he has probably a very, very good sense based upon all the comments that have been made by the community, and all of his experience daily of looking at the community in depth and detail. He could probably guide us a bit down the road of discussing community character and how this particular project would affect that greater character at large.
Okay, well, I had written that down before you said it, so.
By golly, there we go.
I think that's a great recommendation as well.
And I think by having a consultant, that it might be a way that we well, I think it might shift responsibility for the ultimate answer and responsibility for the decision.
Okay.
And I think that we need to wear this one way or the other.
Sure.
We're the board, let's do it.
Okay. How do you all feel about John's suggestion? Dennis?
Guess I'm a little confused, but, I understand, following it very closely, going to the site plan and being a resident here for 20 years. It's new. And Rich Steffens had made some comments, it's a different face and not everyone's gonna like it. But on the other hand, this is the zoning that was set up for this new NBR zone. I guess those people at the time put thought and into what they wanted, and then David came along and this was his idea of what would fit into that zoning. I think we're all a little nervous, okay? Because nobody wants to take the blame if it goes up and everybody's saying, why did they let that happen? On the other hand, it could go up and everybody like the Water Street Market says the greatest thing ever happened. So I guess I'm okay with your thought that we get a third party to look at it, as long as they don't come in and wanna look at it visually and say, we don't like that look, and then the other part, the community character, not get into a long, drawn-out revision of New Paltz. I think we're only looking at a little section. I bring up Princeton all the time when my son went to school. It's very similar. Main Street and Nashua Street is where the college is, but you go off to the side streets, which I'm looking at this to be, and it draws people in, and it's different architecture, obviously. So I guess I'm for the idea. I don't really care if it's this firm or another firm. Like Rick said, they're gonna be told to toe the line and not have a bias. But I don't wanna see something really drawn out for a long period of time, because this poor guy has to get something going.
Okay.
Can I weigh in?
Yeah, please.
Trying to help with respect to putting in context the secret review that you're doing. This project, not worrying about the dust in the corners on some elements, but this project is permitted under the zone. But that doesn't end your analysis there on the secret, okay? It's not if it's in conformance with zoning, therefore it has to get approved. It just means that now that this, because everything that's gonna come before, you can't approve anything unless it's authorized by the zoning code. So it's sort of a given that it's authorized by the zoning code by the time you get around to approval. This element of, say, community character, and it is the most difficult and most amorphous there is of all the ones, I think, that the types of things that secret considers within the general rubric of environment. But it's secret is never an up or down, yes or no analysis. It's more, what is the impact and how can we reasonably and practically mitigate that to the extent that we can. And that's what secret is there for. It's not to decide yes or no on something, it's how can we modify it in some way, inject these other elements into your decision making so that we can make an analysis, so we can modify the project somewhat in order to maybe answer some of these concerns of an impact. There is, I think the concern of whether we're talking about all of New Paltz as a community character versus this area, I think it's clear at sometimes it's the entirety of New Paltz, but that's usually when you're doing a comprehensive plan or a general zoning analysis where you have to see how these different parts act. But when you're talking about a particular project in a particular zone, it's that particular character in that particular neighborhood that you're really worried about. There is a short discussion of it in the seeker handbook, which might be helpful. It's not very long, so if you don't mind, I could read that, and I think it might help you get a feel for what you're really looking at.
Sure.
It says community character relates not only to the built and natural environments of a community, but but also to how people function within and perceive that community. Evaluation of potential impacts upon community and neighborhood character is often difficult to define by quantitative measures. Courts have supported reliance upon a municipality's comprehensive plan and zoning as expressions of the community's desired future state or character. If other resource-focused plans such as a local waterfront revitalization plan, a greenway plan, a heritage area plan have been adopted, these may further articulate desired future uses within the plan. The planning area, which here would be just that particular area. It says examples of actions affecting community character that have been found to be significant include the introduction of luxury housing into a working-class ethnic community and construction of a prison in a rural community. Examples of action found not to be significant include low-income housing and shelters for the homeless proposed to be located within existing residential areas. So again, you're looking at a character, looking at a particular project. How, if at all, can you mitigate some impacts of that in connection with how it fits into the community character is really your job.
I get a sense of that suggesting, not telling, suggesting the idea of like and similar to. Is that?
I'm not quite sure where you're going.
Did it, like you said, you mentioned as an example that they have in that particular area, upscale housing within a working class neighborhood.
Right.
So,
What could happen, for instance, right?
Right.
Let's say the luxury housing is allowed, right? You can't say, well, I don't like luxury housing, so I'm gonna say no to it.
Mhm.
But if having some sort of opulent luxury housing in a very working class neighborhood, if you feel that that affects the community character, there may be ways in which you can modify the look of that
Okay.
luxury housing
okay,
to be less at odds
right.
with the working class architecture that's there already.
So it's not suggesting that we have something that's like or similar to the existing structures within the immediate
Correct.
area.
Yeah, you don't have to have that.
Okay, okay.
But you have to take into consideration what is there,
Mhm.
because it helps define what the community character is, as well as the comprehensive plan and the zoning.
Mhm.
But the zoning here obviously was meant to go ahead and have mixed-use neighborhood. That's the zoning that's particularly applicable here.
Mhm.
And so that's part of the community character is you have, the village has said, we want the community character to include this mixed use. Now, it's always the most difficult with respect to consistency with community character when you have the first of a new element that is allowed to be in there. In fact, was rezoned to encourage mixed use with an area that obviously doesn't have mixed use right now. But you can't just say, well, the zoning allows it, therefore we have to have it. But you have to look at the surrounding neighborhood and say, well, with this design, with its placement, with its scale, with its mass, how does this fit in with respect to the general community? And it's a very difficult area. I think sometimes, if you have a good consultant, the consultant can help better define some of those elements for you. And so you can look at consultants, and a lot of times those decisions are made without consultants. So it's really up to you. I think Michael has really drawn the issues well as to how they might be able to assist. I guess that's it. Talking
Thanks.
too long.
No, that's much appreciated.
So, just a question. In examining community character, we're looking at existing community character, not something that might take place in a sort of plan or future or,
If it were only that easy.
yeah.
But no, it's more than that, because
Yeah.
community character is defined by the comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
which talks generally about where you may want to be going,
Sure.
as well as where you are, as well as zoning. And zoning, many times, especially here in this context, is a new zoning that is trying to set a different feel for that area, an additional feel for that area. So I think you do have to look at not just what's there,
Right.
but also what the comprehensive plan and zoning
What
envisions
it might
for
be.
that area. That's part of the community character.
Right, but given that the remaining portion is being examined now, that has an impact on what we're looking at in terms of this project,
Yes,
just to make that statement.
yes.
So,
What are our next steps?
so, go ahead.
Your suggestion of working with David, I think we could start there, maybe next time
Okay.
we meet, and bring in our planner to talk about community character and his view, but again, getting to concerns about bias, everyone has bias, and I think we need to hear from our planner to see where his position is and how he's interpreting things, and if we feel that we need to go further with a secondary firm, another firm to come in to address these, I think we can discuss it after we meet with them.
Okay, so you're focusing on community character issues,
Yeah.
but let's take them one at a time. Well, let me first say, is there, from this board's perspective, each of you, we've seen that the way we wrote the scope, the community plan, the consistency with community plans, consistency with community character have significant overlap. So are you comfortable with looking at them through more or less the same lens, recognizing that we'll want to look at some different facets in some cases, but essentially if, in other words, to me, it still goes back to, okay, what plans are we going to compare this with? And look at those that the applicant has provided in their documents, but we need to make sure that we're comfortable with that, and do we need others? As well as with the issue of character, how are we gonna define the scope of what we're going to be looking at when we address the issue of community character? So can we, for the moment, put those two together?
Yeah.
Okay, you all right with that, Dennis? All right, so then there's the other element, which is the visual and aesthetic impacts. So the question then is, so what's in front of us is the idea of using our in-house expertise, both our planner and I would also say our attorney, who's got a lot of experience from a lot of communities. I'd like to draw on them to provide some foundation for how us as individual board members and collectively how we'd like to look at the visual impact and the community character. But I would say that, as you said, we have to wear this, I think you said. I would say we have to own this. I think to help the conversation, it might be fruitful for each of us to give them some information about, based on what we've had so far. Do you disagree?
No, what information do you want us to give them?
Your thoughts about so let's take the visual impact component. Do you have specific questions that you would like to have answered that you feel, based on what we asked for in the scope, what we got in the document, are there questions that you would like our planner and attorney to address? That would be the kinds of things for that. For the question about community character and community plans, I guess it would be more of we could do it either way. We could say, you tell us what you think is important from the point of view of community character, and then we can dive into that. Or we could start by saying, well, you and you and I and you, we each think these are the things that we should consider, and these are the plans that we should look at, give them the whole collective package, and then have them say, okay, well, great, but, or, and then they would have something to start with. A little vague, but maybe that helps. I'm open to any process here, so.
Michael, what are we trying to ultimately come to grips with, I guess? I mean, we've looked at the designs, some people like it, some people don't. Now, if we pull in David are we gonna reevaluate the look of the building?
That's
or-
not what we're doing under seeker. We're not designing the building. At least that's not what I see it as. The question is, given the current design as proposed, you have to go back to, essentially back to part 2 of
Okay.
seeker and say, okay, well, you don't have to go back to part 2, but you have to look at the 4 areas under the environmental assessment form and imagine, okay, so this is the site plan that we currently have. What do you feel, for example, are there potentially moderate to large, potential significant impacts under the rubric of visual and aesthetic impacts when you look at this site plan, this version that they provided to us? You can set the older one aside because now we're focusing on this one. And right, so I mean, if we work backwards for a moment, the whole point was we got to a point in the environmental assessment review where we decided we had identified 4 areas of potentially moderate to large impacts, and the board decided that they would choose to give the applicant an opportunity to take another look at their project site and their plans and see if they could address those for the purpose of trying to reduce the level of impact in each of those 4 areas. So, ultimately the question is, now, you could frame it several ways. Have they succeeded in doing that in your mind for each of those 4 things and for each of us individually? Another way to look at it is to say, okay, we have now a revised site plan. Let's look at it through the lens of seeker, but we're not going to look at all 18 things again. Because it's pretty clear they didn't do anything in their revision that made anything worse from any of the other
Just
14 that we already said were no bigger than potentially small impacts. So that's our goal, and we have to be able to address those. So it's not a question of the building design in the sense of I like the building design or I don't like the building design. It's a question of, does the current site plan as it's proposed have potential impacts under seeker for these 4 areas: visual and aesthetic, for consistency with community character in terms of transportation, and consistency with community plans.
It's not just impacts, it's significant adverse impacts, right?
Impacts in this case is shorthand for adverse impacts, and it's significant potential adverse environmental impacts, shortened to impacts. Yes, but thank you. So, and part of the reason that I'm bringing this back around is that I felt like over the last couple of meetings that we had that there wasn't substantive enough discussion from each person to convince me that you were ready to vote on that issue. To say, okay, let's go back and say, okay, with this site plan, we're going to look at visual impacts. Are you ready to say whether those impacts are none, small, moderate, or large? That's essentially what we have to do. And so I wanted to pull more out of each of us. And so my thought was, and that was part of the reason why I suggested being, but you all have made some excellent arguments for why that is perhaps not the best idea. So really, I mean, if you feel like you have a handle on each of those items and are ready to say, I can consider those things and decide, and I can defend my position and state my reasons why I think there are still moderate to large impacts, or no, there are no longer. That's where we have to get for each of these. And that's what, I mean, if you don't feel that we need any additional input other than the conversations among us, that's fine, if a majority of you feel that way. Or if you prefer to have some in-house expertise, and we certainly have it, then that's fine too. or if you wanna go outside, okay. So,
I guess my point, with you bringing up having this third, this other agency or company take a look, going back to like you did with the transportation, if we feel that even though we've done all of this work and heard all of these different things, and design wasn't what I was really,
Okay.
I used the wrong word. It's just gonna have such an impact that we're not comfortable with it, that it would be an adverse impact. And then I come back to, well, when they did this new zone, they knew it was gonna be completely different. The zoning for this NBR zone is gonna be completely different. So whatever came along it's gonna be like this. It's gonna be something that we're not used to. It's gonna be, say, outside of the community character, but it's certainly gonna be different than what we're used to looking at. Based on that, I would say I'm with you if you wanna get someone to come in and give us a brief oversight as to what their feelings would be to this new zone, not what Bill's doing, but if, just to reassure us that we're on the right track, we're okay with what we're feeling. If you said, just now, are we comfortable with the 4 areas that we've already looked at, to move ahead and say yes or no? But do we just still want someone to, more professional perhaps, give us a little support?
Well, I think too, in this, we need a fresh set of eyes, a professional that has a fresh set of eyes, because we've been looking at this for so
Yeah.
long, and there's so many ties to this decision that I think it would be beneficial to have that. I mean, I think I've stated that it'd be good to meet with David, we'll see how that conversation goes, but I think there's some benefit to getting some outside perspective on what we're looking at, how
Well,
objections.
that's my feeling, but it would have to be quick,
Yeah,
we
well,
can't
exactly.
But if, I think
not
we'd
talking
all
about
feel
a long
good if
form.
somebody came along and said, yeah, you guys are on the right track. I think what you want, your decision is we're supporting your decision.
I think, if I might interject,
Please.
there's a little bit different, and I'll talk about it as 3 discipline areas, because I do think the community character, community plans are essentially the same thing. In fact, the handbook itself, as I just read, when you talk about community character, says community character is defined by the plans of the community. So I've never really seen this as much of a distinction
Yeah.
with a difference. I think it's a distinction without a difference. Some of the other secret materials try to, I think, create a difference, but I think it's really not there. But there's that aspect, there's the visual aspect, and there's traffic. I think that the traffic is always the one that planning boards can use additional expertise on, because there's so much dealing with the type of analysis that goes on. It's really an engineering specialty of traffic engineering, and whether or not there is an impact is sometimes hard to tell by looking through all of the various arrows on the turns of 400 pages of documents. I think visual is something that, in the end, it's really not for you to sort of delegate to another set of eyes as to whether or not you think it's a big impact or not, but an expert can tell you whether or not what you're looking at is really what it appears to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's very valuable for you. And if they come in and say, this is exactly what it looks like, when it's up there, this picture is an accurate representation, I think then you can tell whether or not you think it's significant or not. Because your decision-making now is actually past the moderate to large. Your next decision tree is really whether it's still significant that hasn't been mitigated to the greatest practical extent.
Okay.
And if your answer is no, it's been mitigated to the greatest practical extent, then you don't have to worry about going further in the secret review of that item. So I think for the visual, it's very helpful many times to have somebody say, yes, what you're looking at is that, or, well, this picture really gives a skewed look of things, maybe not intentionally, but it gives a different view. you really should think that it looks a little bit taller than that, or a little bit wider than that, because of the angle of the camera that's used, because of the lens that we use. You can get very technical with respect to visual aspects of these things. Community character, I think, is the one that, although an expert can be helpful, it is sort of the least helpful, I think, to planning board members generally. But they can bring up some character if they analyze the various plans that you have and say, well, this is collectively what the community character is, given the comprehensive plan, given the others. Now, you can do that on your own, but it's sometimes helpful to have somebody who's an expert in that, or David, who's an expert in that, also explain it to you. But I think you ought to look at those three areas a little bit differently as to the input that you need.
Thank you. Did anyone have difficulty imagining the size and scale of the building at the site visit?
Not after we saw the balloons and you look at it enough, you know, I do it a lot. I'm over there and I look and I have a pretty good mental picture of what I'm probably looking at
Yeah.
for a long time.
So I've only heard from Mike so far in terms of your impressions from the site visit.
Well, I didn't have any trouble imagining the size of it. I mean, it's a different experience. It's a different experience, of course, when you're in an empty lot. And if you are surrounded by other structures of the same size and scale. So I had no difficulty.
No, I don't mean just on that narrow question. I mean, Mike took me through sort of his sense of the public space, and then when he walked the perimeter, I'd love to get, what were your impressions?
I think your tour and how you outlined and how you explained things was very clear, and the layout in the front was, I had no difficulties, you know, imagining how bicycles and pedestrians would travel along 32 or North Chestnut. Because the balloons were blowing around, that didn't affect my idea of what the height would be. I still have concerns about what people will see from the street if you do include the roof deck, in terms of heads or shoulders or torsos or what people would see from the street.
And we're gonna get you that visual.
Yeah, and you know, I thought it was a worthwhile experience to really get in there with this group of people and talk about it. And I also walked a little bit along the rail trail. It's not an unfamiliar corner to me. I pass it quite frequently, and since day one I've examined it. And so, you know, that's my impression of the visit. I didn't reach any conclusions. You know, I'm very open about what the plan is.
I didn't have any difficulty imagining the scale of the project, and again, looking from the rail trail, I went around to the cul-de-sac and kind of got a visual idea of where it was, and I sat across the street at Stewart's, giving it kind of an idea of where it is. So I didn't have any difficulty in determining what the scale it would look like. Again, the front area, it's easy to imagine. Had a little difficulty in imagining what's going to happen between the edge of the building and where the little waterway is, because it slopes down so much and there's a lot of weeds. A little bit difficulty there,
Oh.
seeing how that's going to.
Like behind the parking lot,
Right.
behind, yeah, that ditch.
Is that
over
west?
there.
Yeah, where the ditch is on that kind
Yeah,
of
on the west side.
northwest side.
Mhm.
Just on the ground scale, how it drops off. I had a little bit of difficulty imagining that because I know there's going to be some changes made to it. But no, I have a good sense of the scale of it and comparing it to the height of other things, like some of the trees that are in the area, and from a distance looking at it. I get an idea of it. So I didn't have any problem in terms of the visual impact of actually looking at it. Now I gotta decide how does that come to effect, and that's kind of the essence of it.
Okay. What do you think?
You know, pretty much, I thought, you know, the site review was important, and I talked to Barry at some point about the grading and the level. It, you know, it's hard to visualize exactly from where the bike lane is and parking was gonna be, but you could pretty much explain that. But again, I think going through all of the illustrations and the designs and everything, you have a real picture of what's going up there. I think it did mitigate, with, by putting more of that walkway area in the plaza area with the sculpture and all of that, sends off a nice message, but it's still going to be, again, a visual impact. But again, there's nothing to compare to.
So, okay, so board members, all right, so this is, let me just see if I'm clear and see if we can move on here. So, we're okay with the, there's no we haven't had any conversations about transportation, I think
Good.
we're fine.
Yeah.
We're gonna go ahead with Alta and
Can I ask one question about that though, Mike? Because I didn't get a chance to touch on that.
one that,
On the transportation.
yes, go ahead.
I will say that amount, maybe it's because it's a New York City-based firm, but $7,000 to review documents is really a lot. It seems like, I know that that's the will not exceed number, but usually in my experience, consultants reach the will not exceed number. Just saying, in all the experience of all the consultants I've hired, that seems, I had sticker shock when I saw that. Maybe I don't understand the scope of the analysis, but it's just reviewing documents, right? They're not building anything. They're not doing a study of any sort. They're reviewing the documents that we submitted, correct?
And providing interpretation.
They're doing more than reviewing your documents. They're reviewing, in the case of, well, your documents includes the Mazer traffic information, which is.
I mean, the whole body of stuff.
They're also,
It just made me question when I saw that number. It made me question, boy, maybe I don't understand the scope of this thing, because it's a lot. Are they, just for point of fact, are they a New York City based? Is that what you said? Oh, you said New York based.
New York State.
Okay.
Alta will assist the planning board with review of transportation-related items, both on and off-site related to this project. We understand the range of concerns related to the Zero Place proposal. The building's proximity to Huguenot Street could lead to increased traffic along this historic corridor and should be mitigated through design. The site provides a key link to the Walker Valley Rail Trail, but its close proximity to the trail should not detract from the trail itself. With an expected high number of pedestrians and cyclists around the site along Route 32 and crossing Route 32, conflicts with motor vehicles should be mitigated to the greatest extent possible. Alta has a wealth of experience evaluating these types of conditions and has the ability to think out of the box and develop unique solutions to common issues. This review will include on-street bicycle and pedestrian accommodation, off-site bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, traffic mitigation, transit connectivity, complete streets implementation, and parking. Alta will conduct a site visit with the planning board and applicant if necessary, otherwise reviews Google Earth, review related planning documents, of which they list several, review and provide written comments on the EAF Part 3 submitted by the applicant, will focus on transportation in and around the site, including bicycle and pedestrian circulation and access to the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail, traffic analysis, parking, and landscaping.
So it looks like it's hard to sort of synthesize that quickly, but it sounds like you're asking them to, in some sense, go beyond reviewing the documents, but look at independent data about the area, like looking at the streets, looking at, I don't know what they would pull on there, but